Alright, well, welcome aboard the Eclipse 500. Today we're going to be showing you a pre-start sequence, through the start sequence, getting ready to taxi. And of course, we're starting from a cold, dark cockpit, going to be powering everything up. So the first thing we want to do, just really quickly, is touch upon the concept of using checklists in turbine aircraft. And early in our flight career, we used a checklist more as just a step-by-step guide of what we're doing. So now we want to take a step back and actually think about what we're doing and start with what we call a flow pattern. So the flow is just an easy-to-remember sequence that will take us through everything that we need to be doing. And once we've completed those tasks, we'll come back and use the checklist to double-check our work. So another way to think about this is that this is a checklist and not a do list. So it's a great concept that can make everything go a lot faster and smoother. So personally, for my pre-start flow, I sort of imagine anytime I'm getting started to do some activity, I need to do some kind of a stretch. So I'm getting started in the airplane, put my arms up, getting ready to do a big stretch with my arms, and that's going to kind of lead me around the cockpit. So of course the first thing we're going to look at straight up in the air are engine start selector switches. We want to make sure those are in the off position. Fortunately, we've got the computer-controlled FADEC engines in the Eclipse, so if we did for some reason turn on a battery with the engine selector in the on position, we don't risk it damaging anything, probably just embarrass ourselves when the engine begins to start. So continuing that stretching motion all the way around, behind us we have our quick-dawn oxygen masks. That's our cue to engage the oxygen system here. You can hear it pressurize, and we can go ahead and test the emergency function on both oxygen masks. So that one works. The co-pilot side works as well. Moving forward, we can continue sweeping forward through the cockpit. We've got our side bolsters with 4 circuit breakers on each side. Those are all in. Our headsets are plugged in. And then we can keep coming forward as we approach the battery switches here. We've got our flight controls. We can do a flight control check. Our controls are free and correct. And then we continue forward, check our emergency gear extension handle. That is stowed. Our throttles are back in idle. Normally these should be in idle if you were doing an extended pre-flight. If you were checking perhaps the VOR doors in the aft end of the airplane, you can check those by pushing the throttles forward with the battery on. So if you were to leave those forward and attempt an engine start, again, because we have FADEC, the engine's not going to hurt itself, but it will startle you because after engine start, it will attempt to move to the throttle position you've selected. It's always a good idea to double check these, make sure they're back at idle. Continue moving forward, we've got our flap selection. It is up, our parking brake is on, and just move straight across with all of our switches. All of our lights and ice protection system are off. We can turn our beacon on, gear selection handle is down. Finally coming across just below our battery switches, cabin air. Today we're going to start with that off. And our oxygen selection, which is for our passengers, the masks are off as well. So, good time to break in our flow pattern, go back to our checklist, just run through and double check and make sure we haven't missed anything, and we're looking good so far. So the next step would be to turn on the batteries. And this is really another highlight of a good sort of pilot tip, which is that any time we're manipulating anything in the cockpit, we never want to just blindly move a switch or move a control. We always want to anticipate what's going to happen when we move that control, and then verify that the aircraft is actually doing what we're asking it to do. So a great example is when you're flying and you move the flaps to a new selection. Don't just assume that the aircraft has done that. Actually look at your flap indication, make sure that the flaps are moving, and you can verify that the control forces have changed and so on. So it's no different when turning on the batteries. You want to have in your mind an anticipation of what's going to happen when you turn on the batteries. And that way, if you turn on the batteries, and you hear a noise that you're not expecting, some sort of pump or something that's running, that's a good indication that you might have missed a switch somewhere in the sequence. Obviously, if it's something dramatic, then you're sort of primed to just turn the batteries back off and hopefully protect anything that may be misconfigured on the airplane. But what we should find, what we're anticipating, is fairly silent cockpit. We'll hear the fans from the Avionics, and then we'll get one master caution with the batteries are both in a discharge state. So we'll go and turn on the system and start batteries. We're going to leave our bus tie open for now. So that was that master caution that we were anticipating. The next step here is we're going to clear the splash screen here. And we want to use the right side proceed button, not the left side proceed button. And you'll see just in a moment, once we push the proceed button, you'll notice this left side has changed to a dry motor function.
So the reason we don't use the left one is just in the unlikely chance that we were to tap that button twice, we wouldn't want to engage the dry motor, which is the starter on the left engine. So now as everything's warming up, we can sort of continue with another flow. I like to just proceed around the cockpit with one more circle. We can test our microphone on the oxygen mask on the right side, come up to our autopilot control panel, set anything up for the departure, our altitude, heading, speed select. Continue over the side, check the mask microphone on the left side. And that is working. And then of course, we can continue setting up our PFD. I set my bearing pointer to the FMS, which helps give me a distance to my next waypoint. I'll push the overlay here to get both traffic and radar. And then I'll go for the 360 view on my HSI. And just for consistency's sake, we'll do that on the right side as well. Finally, the end of this flow is to take your system synoptic and start on the right side and move all the way toward the left. So we start on the ops page. We can make sure that we have our weight and balance accepted, which we do. Input our temperature for the day and post our rotation speed. You may notice that we have a yellow here for the flap selection. That's because our flaps are selected in the up position. Our rotation speed is assuming we're going to have flaps in the takeoff position. So before we taxi out, we will move the flaps, and that should clear. Right now, if we were connected to a GPU, we'd have the option to continue our system tests. Obviously, we're doing a battery start. Anytime you're on the battery start, you have a limited resource of power. So we're going to wait and do those system tests after we start at least one engine. So we can go ahead now, move over to our electrical synoptic page, and coming back to the fact that we have that battery bus tie open, we can look at the battery buses and see if we have good power on both batteries. It's important to leave that open when you're checking the bus voltage so we get a good indication of what each battery performance actually is. If this is closed, what we're really looking at is the voltage on the strongest battery. If the other battery is weaker, one battery will power all the buses. You can see as an example, if I turn the start battery completely off, we still have power to the rear buses. So just for the purposes of checking the battery voltages on both sides, we leave that bus tie open. Now that we've checked those, we're going to want to close that bus tie so that the system can proceed through its normal isolation sequence throughout the start. If we were to forget this bus tie and attempt to start, we're going to get a CAS message and an aborted start because it won't be able to isolate itself as it needs to. So we've really finished all of our checks. We'll check one more time with our checklist, make sure that our flow has taken us through everything. And now we're ready for our engine start. Okay, so same thing as before that we talked about. Anytime you're manipulating a control, we want to anticipate what's going to happen. So the reason we have our fuel synoptic page up here is when we move the right side selector to the on position, we should see the fuel pump engage. We can monitor the rest of the start sequence, but these FADEC engines will really handle the sequence themselves. They'll engage the starter, the ignition, they'll monitor for an undervolt, for an overtemp situation. We really only need to look at oil pressure and N1 rotation. It's not a bad idea to also monitor the rest of the system and anticipate any problems. For example, we can monitor if there's a weak voltage from the battery and anticipate maybe a hot start. So we'll go ahead and select the on the right side and monitor the start. So you can see the fuel pump running there. And we're just guarding the switch with our hand. In case we see any sort of problem, we can quickly turn the engine off if need be. We have good ignition on the right side. Good N1 rotation, good oil pressure. And the starter has been turned off, the ignition is off. And of course you'll see once the engine is stable and running, these temperature limits will come back down to the normal operation temperature limits, and we should get one caution light because the generator turned off. So there we go, we'll go ahead and turn on the right side generator. Now, one of the things we want to do is to try to utilize the system in such a way to be easy on the equipment. So we've just conducted a battery start. You can see that the generators are putting on a lot of power to recharge those batteries. So now what's a good idea is to use this time, let the system charge up the batteries, and continue with the tests that we didn't want to do earlier because we were running on battery power. So we're going to go back to this synoptic page and run through our system tests. So the first test here is our cockpit lamp test. So we're looking for a couple patterns. On the keyboards here, we should have a sequence of 4 lights, 2 lights, and 4 lights. So we say 424 on both keyboards, 424, which we've got that. And then on the autopilot control panel, we're looking for a similar configuration of lights. We have these 4 warning lights here, 3 indications on the autopilot, 4 more lights on the right side. So it's 424 on the keyboards, 434 on the autopilot control panel. And we can press this button here for stopping the test. The next one is the auto flight, which is our autopilot. We'll go ahead and hit the start test button. What that allows us to do is turn on the autopilot on the ground. So we'll go ahead and turn on the autopilot here, engage the system, and you can see the controls have got everything. And now we want to test the disengaging sequences for the autopilot to make sure all the various systems work. So we'll try with the pilot side. Re-engage the autopilot. The pilot side cutoff works. The co-pilot side works, and then we'll continue holding the pilot side all interrupts. So we should get the autopilot turning off, the yaw damper turning off, and if we continue to hold, we should get the flight control trim synoptic page appearing on the MFD. There we go. Of course, push that again to silence the system, and then we can push stop test. The next one is our stall protection test, and you want to make sure to leave your finger near the soft key so that you can terminate the test, because you don't want it to bring the stick pusher all the way to the front and then push against the stop, so it can be a little bit hard on the system. So once it begins moving, we can abort the test. So we should get a couple warnings, and then the pusher.
Stall. Push.
So you can see it moving the controls, that system's working. We'll go ahead and initiate the terrain system test. We should get a master caution.
EGPWS system OK.
Which we did, so that's normal. We'll clear that. And finally, our traffic system. If we hit the start here, we can look on our PFD and see we have 3 targets. One's 1,000 feet above, one's 1,000 feet below, one's within 200 feet, and then we should get an oral confirmation.
Skywatch system test passed.
So everything there has passed. We can go back to our fuel and electric pages. We can proceed with a left engine start. So this time we're going to have the generator in the auto mode. We'll just checking both functionality there. And it should be pretty much the same thing on the left side. We're looking for the fuel pump, the electrical system to isolate itself, and then we're watching for N1 and oil pressure on the left side.